There we go. So welcome to the April 2025 of DEIJB Conversations, where we are going to talk about taking a DEIJB inventory in spiritual communities. So we're going to cover kind of the bases of this work as applicable to ministry. This is the dial way out, get out of the weeds for a bit, and let's look and see what we can do here. All right, so you see my screen. That's not what I want to do. 1 second. Try that again. There we go. That should be better. All right, so we'll start with this quote. There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And so much like, the same way that we take our communities through discerning our values, our mission, our vision statements, to really, discerning maybe what we're giving to in terms of a charity organization that's like-minded in our community that we want to see thrive and grow. Maybe even where we put our volunteer hours and service hours as a community out in the world. So we are constantly, I think, in a process in ministry of discovering what the community cares about. And sometimes it comes up accidentally because we discover it through conflict, or, people feeling unheard about their passion project. And I think, there's also that piece of it, that we have the community aspect of what does the community care about? We have the leadership aspect. What does the minister and the board or the leaders of the ministry, what do they care about? What does the congregation care about? And then what do individuals care about? What do the individuals feel very passionate about in terms of DEIJB? Where do they want to make a difference and feel uniquely equipped? Now, there is, a place where all of those overlap, and those are the sweet spots of how we can really leverage people power, people passion, to do this work in the world in an effective way. So why it matters in ministry, now is a really interesting time to even be in the topic of DEIJB as laws are being passed, organizations, government entities are being forced to dismantle their programs, their DEI programs. And, when I listen to the news, when I listen to conversations about it, I feel like some of the solutions or the actions that are being taken to dismantle DEI, like that's not even DEI, like that's just basic human decency. So, it's really interesting to see all of the ways that this topic has been webbed out and, tentacled into different areas. And so, it's really important for us to be clear as spiritual leaders where we stand, on the matter. For me, it was really important when I accepted to facilitate these calls to add that B for belonging. For me, that's really the core of what all of the other letters are for, and what we do in our spiritual communities and our work is to recover that sense of belonging, that we belong to ourselves, we belong to the divine, because we are one. So this is the point of radical oneness. And we can get there through diversity, equity, inclusion, justice. Said in another way, if we are truly experiencing belonging, those other things are just part of the package. And it's easy. Now, once we take something out of theory or out of the ideal, it's no longer easy, right? As we take it into action. So I don't mean to downplay that at all, but if we can just remember and hold close to the heart that in our principle of oneness, the rest of this flows very easily. So this work reflects the heart of our spiritual teachings: oneness, love, justice. It builds truly inclusive, welcoming, and transformative communities. And I added there a little note: competence versus well-meaning attitudes. So we have had well-meaning attitudes in unity probably from the beginning, right? We mean well when we say what we believe about everyone belonging, when we say what we believe about oneness, we are all one, when we say what we believe about, putting our affirmations all over everything. But because much of our principles are anchored in thought, and we teach that our thoughts create our reality, it creates this unique opportunity to really separate from emotion, to separate from the heart, to separate from action. So we can have a set of well-meaning attitudes that aren't really truly demonstrated. And so this gives us an opportunity to create the kind of competence that helps us to live out and to practice our principles and to go beyond those well-meaning attitudes, which are a great start. I do not mean to diminish the power of well-meaning attitudes, right? It's a great place to start, but we don't want to leave people there. It also helps to uncover unconscious bias and systemic inclusion. And another way to say that too, first, is it helps us to realize that, to be able to name unconscious bias, to be able to name systemic exclusion, and to make the spiritual life relevant to the community life, right? As people who live in a state, a country, a city, whatever it is, and have that in common. It allows us to really name that we are part of both our human and humanity, and systems that are born from that, as much as we are a part of a spiritual belongingness. It also strengthens trust and engagement, as well as spiritual growth. Some of these wounds go very deep with people, people who were raised in a racist family and have had to overcome their own racism and have done that work, who are just discovering their unconscious bias in new ways and feel shame about that or feel guilt. So it becomes another opportunity to address our wounds, to dress our wounds, and to heal, both as individuals and in the power and the strength of community. When we can really up the competence, then people can learn how to talk about these things, which helps us to unpack shame. Got a couple people in the waiting room here. There we go. All right, sorry about that. So when we can do that, when we can give the competence, and we can allow these conversations to flow in the work of our community in such a way that we normalize it, then we deflate the political charge, and we also give opportunity to release shame, to release like a taboo, like we shouldn't talk about this. And so to avoid having to talk about it, we're just going to spiritually bypass and talk about and lean into our well-meaning attitudes, which then take us into very real opportunities to step in it, if you will. So if we want to really get in, dive in, do the work, do the growth, and spiritually grow as well as socially grow, then it's ours to give our people an opportunity to raise that competence. And as leaders, it's our job to push the edge and to allow ourselves to go into that level of growth and work. So what is a DEIJB inventory? We can go in a million different directions with this, but it's a reflective tool for evaluating how DEIJB principles are integrated into all aspects of ministry. So that's what I mean when I say we're going to dial way out, where we have been in the weeds of different topics, and how those ideas relate to ministry. We're going to just dial way out and look at the whole scope. And it's both an internal as well as how does our community fit into its broader community, whether it's interfaith with other churches and spiritual centers in the community, whether it's just in the community at large, and then we could go all the way to the unity movement as well. And so it's that opportunity to really look and evaluate the big picture, and then go back to where we started with, how does that help us to inform and discern what we really care about as a community. And what Brenda's church discerns might be completely different than what my church discerns, and all are valid, right? There is so much work to be done. It's okay to do the part of it that you want to do, and to trust that if you're building competence and skills in any one area, many of those skills will transfer over to other areas. And ultimately it becomes habituated to grow in this way and to learn new language, to evolve in these important ways. So we want to assess policies and practices. So also the business of our spiritual communities, how we operate together, our communications, our culture, and our leadership. Do we make DEIJB part of our board training? Do we expect our key leaders and of the different ministry teams to have a better understanding than the congregation at large? How are we really putting this into policy and practice? How are we demonstrating these values in our communications? And has it become part of our culture or not? And again, when we're doing this kind of inventory and assessment, we're not judging, we're just noticing so that we can, figure out how we want to proceed and what is the best way to accomplish goals. What are the goals? It also encourages accountability, growth, and transformation. So when we take that inventory and really make time to look at it, then we discover. All right, so the core principles are right there in the letters. Diversity, who is present? Who is not present? Whose voices are heard? What is the level of diversity? I know many of our churches don't have great diversity of age, don't have great diversity of race, maybe don't have great diversity of socioeconomic status, and all of those will vary by community. But to really look at, where is the diversity? How is it showing up in this community? And just being with it. It doesn't mean you've done something wrong if there is no diversity. That's what we call human nature. People like to gather with people who are like them. So it makes sense that that will be reflected in our spiritual communities. So that's not a bad thing. It's just a point, to be aware of, because then we can notice whose voices are part of our conversation and whose voices are not. So maybe we need to be intentional about going outside of our group to get other perspectives at the table. Maybe not permanently. It's not like you can go pick someone up and bring them and now you're part of our church and you're going to help us make decisions. But it can be an invitation to, we're working through A, B, or C, and we really want another voice in this. Would you mind having a conversation with me or with me and my board president, or coming to a board meeting? We'll, buy you lunch or dinner and just have this conversation with us so that there can be another perspective. Not that we're going to do that all the time, but there could be some very important times to be mindful and intentional about that. Equity, are resources, access, and leadership opportunities fairly distributed? Is it as easy for a 25-year-old in your community to run for the board as it is for a 65-year-old? Is it as easy for a single mom to take classes in your community as it is for someone who has lots of family support for childcare? Just really looking at what are the resources in the community and what is the access to those resources? Is it easy for a deaf person to come in and have access to your spiritual teachings? Is it easy for someone, a disabled person, to access your building, your parking lot? Is it easy for people to navigate your parking lot at night? There's lots and lots of different ways that we can really look at who has access to our space, to our classes and activities, and also to our services, which really the core of that is who has access and how easy is that access to our spiritual teachings. Transformational, life-changing spiritual teachings. And who gets to rise up in leadership? Inclusion, are all people empowered to engage and lead fully? Is there an expectation that you have to do this or you have to have been here as long as the other people who are teaching? You've only been here 2 years, you might have it written into your bylaws. It's very common, you have to have been a member for a year before you can run for the board or teach a class or lead a small group. But, are we just waiting for people to sort of pass that threshold, or are we nurturing them along the way of that threshold? So that it's not like one day in the future you're going to get an invitation. We're inviting you onto the path. And if you continue down this path, you will naturally gain the leadership skills that you'll need when the time is right, so that people are feeling loved up in that way and supported and nurtured in that way. And then justice, are we actively dismantling oppression and inequity? That one can be so charged because people go right to politics, and the church doesn't belong in politics. Politics don't belong in the church. And I wake up queer, Latina, minister. I'm already political. Like this, I haven't even said a word and I'm already political. And I would say for at least all of you on this call, except is Russ here? Yes. Except Russ, as a woman, in the pulpit, teaching, our new thought teachings, you are already political. So, I think we can get over this, either very carefully and specifically define what it means to be political, or just kind of let go of that sort of reactive piece to it. And like, if we are in a spiritual realm, a spiritual, our professionalism, and we're talking about justice, we are having a spiritual conversation, not a political conversation. And I think it's really important for us to claim that and to own that, and to live that. So are we actively dismantling oppression and inequity? Because at the root of that is belonging. And at the root of belonging is radical oneness. And that is at the core of everything we teach. So we can get there in 3 degrees, maybe less. Belonging. Do people feel seen, safe, and celebrated in our space? I regularly tell my community that if you're dressed up in your Sunday best, it's because you have a cloak of authenticity on. It's not about what you're wearing. It's not about how good you look. It's not about, maybe you just barely crawled out of bed to get here. Maybe you didn't crawl out of bed and you're online, and that's your Sunday best, is that you are authentic and you're able to be seen, safe, and celebrated no matter what. That we all are just, doing our best to thrive. So these are the core principles that we'll be working with in our inventory. And then here are some areas of ministry to assess. And for those of you who are new, this PowerPoint will be added to the USCR website on the page for the DEIJB support call, along with this recording. So leadership and governance. We want to take that inventory and really go through DEIJB in these areas: leadership and governance, worship and sacred services, language and communication, hospitality and welcome, programs and education, community partnerships and outreach, physical space and accessibility, staff and volunteer culture. So you see, most of it is very internal, but it's also the external aspect of the community partnerships and outreach. Also, when you begin to define and sculpt and shape your culture as a community, that will bleed into, hopefully, and be demonstrated in everything that you touch, in social media, in your newsletter communications. When people come and watch a service, they're going to have a sense that there is something very intentional happening here with DEIJB. Not that you're blasting those letters everywhere, but if somebody gets up on the platform and says, my name is Jackie, my pronouns are she, they, right away, that there's something going on here, something intentional and demonstrated that's over and above. And that goes miles to help people feel seen and safe without even having to explain anything. It becomes demonstrated as part of the culture of the community. So here are some sample questions. Who's making the decisions? So let's say we take this and apply it. Let's go with our hospitality and welcome. So these are the people who are taking care of your folks after the service, maybe feeding them, and the people who are greeting them at the door. Who's making the decisions? How diverse is the leadership? Are their mentorship pathways for underrepresented groups? So if we're talking about our greeters, there's probably a team lead. Maybe you have enough to have a team lead that's making decisions about, what happens when a greeter notices someone in the parking lot who is disabled and needs extra assistance. Is there, a protocol sort of, maybe the greeter can't leave their post at the door, but maybe there's someone else that they can tap that can go out and help and assist someone inside. How diverse is the leadership in all of your ministry teams, but, let's look at your core group of hospitality and your welcoming committee, your greeters. Is there diversity in that? And what can be done to improve and increase that, if anything? And it could be, maybe you can't add more people to create diversity, but maybe there are pronoun stickers that people are wearing. Maybe there's, something, if it's Women's History Month, maybe there's a button that they can wear. There are different ways to communicate diversity without, having to have a token person there, or to feel like you just can't do this because you just have a bunch of old white people who are some of my favorite people, by the way. But we get into this rut of I hear in communication with among leaders. And I feel it too sometimes, is like, my community, this reflects the community that we live in. It is predominantly white, and like most churches, you know, the majority of people are probably over the age 55, if not 65. And that's what is happening here. So we don't have to fight that. I'm really of the mind that until we get every single baby boomer in our churches, we don't have to worry about anything else, right? Let's just go with the people who are, eating what we're serving up, the low hanging fruit. Then they will bring family, they will bring their kids, their grandkids, and we will start to expand, and become diverse in that way. And we start to get people of color who are baby boomers, and disabled people who are baby boomers. Like it all will work out. We don't have to fight that, but we can be creative in that. And how can we really show diversity that's beyond maybe the faces that are being seen? So I say that, and I spend so much time talking about that, so that we don't let ourselves off the hook. Because it's easy to say, well, I can't do anything about that. What am I going to get, a bunch of Asian people to come to my church? Like, that's not going to work. And they probably won't like it when they get there because it's not a cultural fit. Like, so we just dismiss the whole idea. Instead, let's work with it and apply our creativity to it. So worship, do prayers, music, and imagery reflect cultural and gender diversity? Do we acknowledge cultural heritage and spiritual lineage? And this is where the conversation about, cultural appropriation can come in. So let's invite somebody who is indigenous to a practice, or native to a practice, or religion, or excuse me, tradition, and invite them in as a guest to share about it, so that we're truly celebrating it. If that can't be done, show a video of an authentic lived voice that's talking about it. If you can't do that in your Sunday service, put it in your newsletter, put it on your social media, so that you're pairing together your knowledge, your sensitivity, and awareness that we're not going to just appropriate something, that we're truly going to celebrate it. We don't want to pretend. So if you have a music team who really can't facilitate gospel music, don't schedule them to play gospel music just to achieve some kind of DEIJB dream, right? Be true and authentic to who you are, and be creative. What are the different ways that we can invite diversity and inclusivity in, and honor the people who are there, but also allow creativity to flow. And that's part of building the competency. It also gives us an opportunity to build language and comfort with language around different topics and different groups. Which takes me to the third one, language. Do we use inclusive language, gender neutral, non-ableist, trauma-aware language? Do our materials reflect a wide range of identities and experiences? If every example you use is from your own life, that's going to be very limited. And I know you are all amazing and well-lived people with a variety of experiences, as am I, but it's still going to be limited. So can we use examples, from another lived experience? Can we invite someone up to give a testimony of sorts, to share their lived experience that is widely different from yours, or even wildly different from your own? So that there's, are you scheduling guest speakers who are wildly different from you? So that they're coming in with different perspectives. And even your soloists, some people allow their soloists to speak a little bit before they sing, some don't. But if you have a soloist who even just looks, presents differently, that can go a long way, or is able to, share a lived experience. That can also go a long way. And again, it begins to normalize the use of different language, because the more you hear someone talk about their, spicy brain, their neurospicy brain, which is another way to talk about being neurodivergent, which could be about autism or ADHD. And is that widely understood in the community? Is it normalized to talk about mental health issues, challenges? Is it normalized to talk about physical health challenges without going to metaphysical malpractice? And what are you holding in consciousness? And, this is a chronic thing for you, and putting people down in that way. Can we really have the competence to talk about these things in a way that even if there is discomfort, it's in the state of becoming more comfortable, or we are getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's what this work requires. A willingness to say something that you're not sure you're saying it the right way, but to just presence that, look, I'm not quite sure, how to ask this or how to say this, but I'm really curious if you've changed your pronouns. Just ask, or start with, my name is Jackie, use your own name, and my pronouns are whatever your pronouns are. And, I'd love to, affirm that I have the right pronouns for you. Until everyone in your community can have that conversation, even if they're shaking a little bit, even if they're sweating a little bit or stumbling over the words, but are willing to have that conversation because they know how to do it and why it's important. That's when we know that we are making progress and moving into demonstrated values. Any comments or questions about that or anything that I've shared? I know for those of you who are new, this session is really kind of lecture, but I always welcome a little bit of conversation. Our next session will not be recorded, and that's when we'll really have full, deep conversation. But go ahead if there's anything. Anand, hi.
Hi, so good to see you.
Yeah.
I do have a question. It's a bit tangential, so I'll put it out there, and you can say if we'll talk about it now or later. Um, so I'm brand new to my ministry, January, brand new to ministry.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. And it was when I did my audition sermon before I was hired, I found out. Um, I created a land acknowledgement because that felt
Mhm.
very important to me. And it kind
Mhm.
of blew people's minds
Mhm.
here. And then a couple weeks into my ministry, we started doing it. And I've had a little bit of pushback,
Mhm.
including from somebody who I've done this. I get it. I was married to an African American man. I get it. I'm part of Better
Mhm.
Angels. I get it. But we just need
Mhm.
to move on.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had a conversation with her yesterday, one on one, and it went really well because I just listened, and then I told her this is the context. You know, we're called Unity in the Gold Country. We're in the gold rush place. We're already well acknowledging the gold rush and all the benefits that we continue to get from it. It's time for us to anyway. So my question
Mhm.
is like ways that I can just meet people before
Mhm.
they get to the place where they need to do a one-on-one conversation with me
Yeah.
because they're so riled up.
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question in ministry in general. Like, in my experience anyway. And such a good question. I just had an experience that I'll share. So those of you who've been with me in this conversation, I use it as an example a lot, my journey with the deaf community in my church. So I came into a church who had for 20 years or more invested in ASL interpreters for all Sunday services. And my question in the interview when they asked me how I would grow the church, I was like, well, where are all the deaf people? You have an interpreter every week, but you don't have deaf folks. You've got one, and well, there are a couple others that come. So I did some exploring after I was hired, and there were 5 deaf folks who did not come regularly, but were considered themselves to be associated with the church. And in conversation with them, it's because the interpreter was not skilled in the way that they needed them to be. The interpreter was really geared towards their son and how he used ASL. So we started rotating and getting more competent interpreters. So I've been in this conversation with my community. Now we provide ASL interpretation for everything we do, classes, events, special services, to create the access. Recently, through further conversation with the deaf folks, it was brought to my attention that having the interpreter stand over to the side on the platform creates this experience of like watching a tennis match, because they still watch the speaker for body language. Duh, right? Um, but then they need access through the language from the interpreter. So they're back and forth. And I would see that, like, I could watch them looking back and forth. So during the talk, the interpreter comes and stands a little bit behind me and right next to me. So to your question, we've been doing that for about a month, maybe a little bit longer, a couple months. And I started hearing people online at first, like, why are they so distracting when they're standing next to you like that? And we used to have like a small square at the bottom of the corner for the interpreter, and then everything else was taking up the rest of the screen. Then first we did a side by side, and now they're in frame, so it's one picture. So I started kind of hearing about that. And then last week, for some reason, we got 3 in-person complaints. And so, it's the thing, if there are a few people telling you about it, there are a lot more talking about it. And what I realized was I had not let the hearing community know that we were going to try something out to see if it worked or why. So to your question, and so at the end of my talk, I just acknowledged that. I said, I have failed you. I didn't take care of the whole community. And had I done that, it might have reduced the question, or at least invited people into adjusting and understanding why we were doing this, not to just annoy you, and to acknowledge that for some people with an ADHD brain, it's really hard to have someone there waving their hands right next to the speaker. So then we have sort of competing needs. But I use an example of a conversation that I know happened between 2 people who were watching together in the same room online. And one person was like, "Oh my God, that's driving me nuts. I can't stand it. It's driving me crazy. Why is she standing there, next to her? It's so distracting. Why would she do that? I've got to tell her about it." And the other person was like, "Just don't look," which seems so easy, but to someone who is all worked up and uncomfortable and, irritated by it, but has no idea. And so we had the conversation of why that is what creates true access, to someone. How would you feel if you had to sit there and do a tennis match the whole time? So, so to your question, the more we can be ahead of the curve and communicate why we're doing something and why there's a benefit to it and how it relates to our core values or our mission statement or our vision. I think it helps invite people into curiosity and perhaps a willingness to adjust. you know Maybe I don't want to hear the land acknowledgement every week, but if there's value in having it said in this space every week, then maybe I'll just zone out for that. They get to make their own decisions, and or decide maybe this should be more important to me than it is, or why isn't this important? What is it bringing up in me? And to be with themselves in it. The more we communicate with people, the more we give them opportunities to do that, to grow, and to be in their discomfort, perhaps a little bit. What does it take for a deaf person to walk into a hearing space? What does it take for a queer person to walk into any church?
Mhm.
It takes a lot. So to be able to take care of the mainstream group, for me, it can be easy to lose sight of, but it's so important because it invites them into being part of shaping our space together and using their allyship in that way, in a very intentional way. So I hope that helps.
It does, because the first pushback I got was, why aren't we acknowledging the gold rush?
Yeah.
And
It's our name.
yeah, I was like, it's everywhere,
Right.
including in our name.
It's why we don't have White History Month. It's everywhere, right? Like it is the history that we learn. Like, so,
Yeah,
it's not taking anything away from people, it's adding. But sometimes the instinctual reaction is, I'm going to lose something,
yeah.
if there's change, and to really be with people in that and honor that and invite them to just mindfully navigate that discomfort and adjusting to a change.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
Kyra, did you wave your hand? Did you have a question? No. Okay. Cindy?
Yeah, you addressed this in the last time I was with you, but I don't know if I caught it. So you just said something that reminded me. You get up and you say, "Hey, I'm Reverend Jackie, and my pronouns are," and you say, and right then and there I present. So when I get up and I say, if I were to, my pronouns are she, her. Um, am I sending the same message as you? Because I kind of worry about that cultural appropriation. From your perspective, is it good for all of us to be using our pronouns all of the time? Because in doing so, we're saying to them, we recognize different pronouns and yours are welcome here.
100%. It's more
Okay.
important for a cisgender person to share their pronouns, in my
Okay.
opinion. In my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay.
um, which I think a lot of people would agree. A lot of queer people would
So,
agree.
so
And
say
the reason
more.
is because because if you are cisgendered, you have the power,
Okay.
right? You have the power. It's just like a white person giving a land acknowledgement is going to be more meaningful to me because I think there's a cost for you to do that.
Okay.
And there's also a commitment from you to do that. So for a cisgender person to share their pronouns, you are declaring better than I could that this is a safe space. Like
Okay.
when I say it as a queer person, then it's my space and my space around me is safe. But look around the room and and the people don't, well, as long as I stand near her, I'm safe, kind of thing, But if the straight folks and the cisgender folks in the room are sharing their pronouns, and confirming, affirming other people's pronouns and using it, that now I know this is a safe space.
Okay.
Now I know that. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. That's not appropriation, that's support.
Okay.
That's true allyship. That is being
Okay.
an ally of the top notch.
Thank you.
The toppest notch. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts about that or questions or experiences? And it's one of those things that can be uncomfortable. I worked with a church, with their board and with their ministry leaders on these on an intensive weekend. I went in and we did full training Friday night, all day Saturday, after church on Sunday, and then they implemented having their platform assistants who would get up, to introduce with their pronouns and the minister, and there was immediate pushback, like, why do we have to say that? Why do you have to talk about that? So back to my example of, like, maybe if the first time that had been done is as part of our commitment to inclusivity, or we just went through a training, and so you're going to see some changes from us, and and these changes highlight our commitment to demonstrating what we've been learning, and to truly creating a space that when we say all people are welcome here, that we are doing everything we can to show that we mean it, to just really talking like that to people.
Well,
Cindy.
can I follow up with that? Because what if what if you came to my church and we were all wearing name tags that had our pronouns on them, and you saw that everybody was, oh, these are all white old cisgender people. Does that really say you're welcome here?
It
Yeah.
does,
Okay. Okay.
100%,
Okay.
because then I'm not the only one with the sticker,
Okay. All right. So,
right? Because it makes it okay for me. And here's the other thing, Cindy, if for especially for our younger people, but really at this point, any age, if I need to change my sticker out because I've changed my pronouns and everybody's wearing stickers, it's just easier. It's such like an easy way to show not just tolerance, but true acceptance.
okay. All right. Because we're looking at wanting to start a group and thinking kind of like a support group or just providing a space
Mhm.
based on your folks with faith thing that I came
Yeah,
to a little
yeah,
while ago. And
yeah.
I had a young man who from my congregation who is just really wanting more leadership and more. He just
Mhm.
turned 18. He's about to graduate from high school. He's on fire. I introduced him to James. I asked him to reach out to James to connect with him,
Nice.
to ask him how we can get involved. What can we do? And he came
Nice.
back with all these really great ideas, and he's on fire. And I was talking to my board president about it. And she says, I agree with you. We need to do that. Where do the people come from? How are our people going to react to this? Blah, 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 blah. You know, our other support groups have a program. They follow a 12-step program. What is available? Are we just creating space? Like just so many questions. And who from our church would be served by this? And I said, who from our church is being served in NA, AA, FA, OA, all these other groups that we have there? Maybe none. And she said, okay, I see your point. And I said, we're drawing people in to create a safe space. If they come to us, they do. You know, that's why I said from the beginning when I first came here, our building needs to speak our message.
Yes.
Unity has to be in our building. Get
Yes.
rid of all the pretty pictures that don't say anything and have your message known.
Yeah.
So we've done a really good job with that. I'm very pleased with what
Awesome.
we've done with that.
Good.
We could do more.
Well, and I'll say that conversation that you described with your board president is really important. It's important that she's comfortable enough to ask the question, you know, why are we doing this and who's it for? You know, because then it opens up that can of worms that is how much of what we do is for us and how much of what we do is for the larger community, so that we are shining our light as a unity center in the world, right? Do we require that for someone to interface with us that now they become one of us? Do you see like all of that language it's really separation language. You know, but can we create a space, a safe space, you know, for the queer community, which is why folks with faith exist. The queer community has been pushed out of spiritual spaces so much that it becomes a part of queer culture to not even have your own divine authority, your own inner authority to ask the questions about God, because what you know about God is that you're an abomination, that God has rejected you. So why would you even ask any questions about God? Why would you even ask what other people so freely ask is like, do I believe in God? And is that the name I want to use for God? And, you know, in the queer experience, very often there's religious trauma, and if not directly, just living in this Christian country, you know, it's secondhand, so to speak. So you lose that opportunity to truly explore spirituality in your queerness, and being able to have both together and not push one aside for the other. And so, you know, with folks with faith specifically, if that's your only interface with Unity Church of Overland Park, that's fine. We are not pushing for people to come to Sunday. They are aware that Sundays happen. They are aware that other activities happen and always welcome, but we don't push that. Yeah, for that reason. And it's, you know, it's a great question, because is everything that you're going to do as a community going to be for the people who are already in the pews? Or is there going to be a commitment to do something for those who are not, either not yet or may never be?
Well, you know, if we're only doing for the people who are already there, then we're not doing the number one thing that I hear from every Unity church I've ever been in about what they want for their future. They want to grow, right?
Yeah. Yep. So yes, get all of your cisgender folks to wear pronoun stickers, and that makes it easier for someone who is not to come in and put on their own stickers, and to trust that it will be honored, and that people want to know, you know. And so even just having the habit of introducing yourself with your pronouns just goes a long way, and it takes the emotional labor off the person who maybe has pronouns that it might not be assumed, you know.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great questions, great conversation. Thank you all. So, okay, here's the example for welcome and hospitality team. Are greeters and welcome teams trained in inclusive practices? Are they trained? Like, those are the first ones. I'm, you know, Sue, and my pronouns are she, her, right away to, you know, someone who's new. And, you know, I'd love to bring you in. You know, do newcomers from marginalized groups report feeling welcomed? Have you ever asked? You know, what kind of follow-up do you do with first-time visitors? You know, asking the question, did you feel welcome? You know, not, I noticed you're probably part of a marginalized group. I'm curious if you felt welcomed. That's not what we're saying here. But like, are you noting the kind of feedback? You know, like nobody knew at UCOP that the deaf community was being underserved by the ASL interpreter. Nobody knew that because nobody asked. And nobody asked what would make you feel, you know, well, I can be part of Sunday, but I can't really do anything else. Oh, well, let's have interpreters scheduled for everything. And so, well, you know, there's a financial component to that, but we announce up front, and this is part of what has been requested, say that ASL interpreter is provided. And then you confirm, the deaf person would confirm if they're coming or not. But if they know it's already provided, then so they don't feel like they have to ask for it. So imagine being a deaf person who, if you want to go to a concert, if you want to go to a movie, if you want to go to any public event, you have to ask for access. The doctor, the hospital, you have to ask for an interpreter. So to be able to have a place where you know it's provided and you're not having to do the asking is a huge load off, you know, and really breaks down the walls, because a lot of deaf folks don't even like to be in hybrid spaces because it's just emotionally too difficult. It's just too much. So so transfer that to any other kind of, you know, situation of like, how can we reduce the emotional labor and the toll on people to make our spaces accessible? Our education programs, do classes include diverse perspectives and authors? You know, are you reading books? Are you referencing books by women of color, by transgender folks, by people of different faith traditions? Are cultural and healing practices honored respectfully? Physical space is signage inclusive with language, symbols, accessibility? Is the space physically accessible to all bodies? And for some people, if you're in a historic church building, that may be a real battle for you. And I bless you in that battle, you know. And again, that's where we apply creativity. How can we creatively, you know, make things better? And can we increase our competency enough to have really good conversations about it, and whatever the situation is? Anand.
Yeah, physical accessibility has been a big thing for me. And we have somebody who comes regularly who's in a wheelchair. None of the doors are accessible. And so if anybody has, I'm not sure where to start. I've done some research, but I haven't found like, how do I get those you know, the push panel to,
Yeah.
if anybody has some ideas about that or resources, I would welcome a direct message about that, because that's
You know,
something
that's a
that,
really good question. Like, I wonder if it's a contractor, like just a contractor that, I mean, has put doors in, probably knows how to install those.
Yeah, I can
okay.
speak to this because we did that, and it's actually a door company. So look up
Okay.
door companies and then just start asking around who has the abilities to put in accessible door, you know.
Awesome.
panels.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Brenda. Very good. So from reflection to action, review findings with honesty and compassion, you know, not honesty and shame, not honesty and like, I know we've been talking about that for years and we haven't done anything about it, and just keeps moving, you know, down the priority list. Um, just honesty, like we're aware of this, and is it or is it not a priority right now? And sometimes the thing is not going to be a priority, but do that intentionally and not just because you don't know who to call. You know, not just because it was too hard at one time, and maybe the people who were making it so hard are not even there anymore. You know, sometimes we just forget because we have so much emotional baggage around something that we forget that, you know, to reevaluate. So compassion, to really take that inventory with compassion, but also with honesty. Identify areas of growth and quick wins. What are the low-hanging fruit? What are the easy things? You know, pronoun stickers, easy. You can order them off Amazon. You can buy them at a local store, support local business. But it's easy. You can make your own stickers. It's easy. Invite feedback from impacted voices. You know, if you have, you know, some queer folks in your community, have the conversation. If you have some people of color in your community, have some conversation about it. Do you feel welcome here? Do you feel seen? Do you know, if you're the minister and you're white, you can acknowledge that, like, I'm white, but here are the ways that I try to, show representation. And is it in my head, or do you feel that? Do you feel seen in that way? And just be willing to, listen and to not prove yourself out, but to, just show that you are aware, you have awareness, and that it's important to you to receive feedback. Include questions on your, if you do any kind of surveys, community surveys, include these kinds of questions as well, because you will learn something. And you might even learn ways that people have been made uncomfortable by what you're doing, which is equally important because it gives an opportunity to take care of people. We don't want to coddle people through change. We want to do it in a healthy way, but it's okay to also take care of people. There's someone, when we did 2 years of really directed anti-racism work, and we had someone who was really uncomfortable in it and was working through it too. It was like, I grew up racist. And had a lot of guilt for things that they had said to people, for decisions they had made, but was still there to do the work. And it's like, man, that's the person I'm going to invest my time and energy into, right? Because that is painful work, and that is growth, and that is commitment. And when we can really create that space of vulnerability, then we're all in it together, and we can really, really make changes, and in that way move mountains, I think. Prioritize sustainable, meaningful change. Don't go after something that is not going to be a good fit for your community, or that's going to fail. Really, really look at what can be sustainable in your community. So it is spiritual work, this DEIJB work. It is spiritual work. It's not political work. And we're all about progress, not perfection, because it's about people. It's relational, and people are dynamic and always changing as well. So we want to listen deeply, act boldly, and love radically. And this is the quote that we started with: there's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. All right, so what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you some homework. This will not be graded, and you only have to show it if you come back in 2 weeks on April 24th for our reflection session. And I hope you do. And even if you don't do it and you just want to talk about what you might have done, that's okay. Again, it's not graded, but I'd love to give the homework because I just want to put it in your brain and hopefully into your heart. Take a DEIJB inventory of your community. Identify what is being done well. Give yourself some gold stars. What could use some attention, and what has been missed that may be ready for action? What has not gotten any attention that maybe needs at least to be put on the list, to be evaluated at a later date. But really go through what's happening in your ministry and what are your opportunities, as well as celebrating what has been done. Easy enough? So we'll meet on the 24th at 11 a.m. Central for that reflection session, where we won't record so that we can really get into some deep conversation and discovery with each other. Then on May 8th, which will be the second Thursday of May, we'll be covering more than just accessibility. Right, so with that, I am complete. I'll stop sharing, and we've got about 5 minutes if there's any other questions or comments that you want to bring forward. Kira.
I just wanted to say thank you. This was very helpful, informative. I love the inventory, and I really love the creative ideas and ways that you've presented to make it simple from where we are, because that's one of the challenge for me. I sometimes feel like, wow, this feels overwhelming, when it's not been something that was really taught in my time coming through ministerial school. I've been 28 years as a minister. We had a very different context in which we were trained and developed. And so to learn and how to implement, I talk about these things, but like you said, there's a difference between well-meaning attitudes and actually what are the actions necessary, and how do we do them when we are in not necessarily a very diverse, congregation. And yet we do have, and I love things like the sticker or the name tag with he, she, using the pronouns. And, there's little things that we can do that can transform that just create a different environment. And I appreciate that message and your willingness to provide great examples. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. You know, it is so important too that to remember that especially the grandparents that we have in our communities, they've got probably at least one queer grandkid, or one grandkid that is, exploring their pronouns and changing it up, or, autism, like all of these things, mental health challenges that, they might not feel a competence and even be able to just talk about because there was so much taboo about so many things from their time, and that is hardwired into their bodies. So to be able to, not just look at the diversity, whether it's in the room or not, but to know that all of the people in the room are touching so many other lives, and to raise the competency in the room will make a difference. And it could be life-saving for somebody who's not in the room.
Yeah.
It could be life-saving.
And I love neurospicy
Yeah,
brain.
neurospicy. Yes, yes.
Thank you for that.
Yes, you bet. All right, Cindy.
I just realized that I didn't change my name when I came in here. And if you don't know me, my name is Cindy Yamamoto. My pronouns are she, her. And I will be putting that because I'm on Zoom a lot, and I will be changing that. Rev Cindy is the name I put up because I use this for a daily meeting and other, business things where I use my title. But I always, when I come to a class, I remember to change it, and I didn't today. So I'm recognizing here that my pronouns are far more important than my title. I've never been a title person, but you use them where you need them, I guess. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. Very good. All right, and I see the question in the chat. Where do I find resources? I feel lost. It can be overwhelming. Yes, there are so many resources out there. There are lots of companies, who are sort of private firms that work with DEI topics in community and in businesses. I find those to be really helpful. And I'm going to try to think of, there's one that it's part of next month's. So let me just see if I can pull that PowerPoint up real quick. We have just a second. It's that one in Seattle that we talked about when we did the, I think you were there, when we did the sort of trajectory of moving through our own growth in these areas and these topics. And it was, oh gosh, it's going to be right there. Let me send some out. It's not in this one. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up more time because we're almost at the end of our time. But lots of resources online, for this. And of course, you can always go back to the recordings that we've done if there's something specific, a specific topic that you want to go through. And I will try to create, how about I try to create like a document that has the inventory on it that you could use. It's kind of like a worksheet. Would that work? I'll have that for the next session. And if I get it in advance, I'll send it to everyone who's here.
I started doing that with ChatGPT just now.
Did you?
So
Okay, awesome.
I don't know how good it is yet, but
Awesome.
I'm just like, give me specific small things, and because the first one was like big wide swath, like, are we doing this? And it's like, let's go real narrow first.
Yes, and that's what we typically do month by month. And I just realized, like, let's dial out and just take a whole scope, because there are so many different areas, and not every ministry has opportunity in every area just because of the shape of the ministry itself. So the advantage of dialing way back is then we can just look at the whole thing and maybe see, oh, what's really hot here, what people are really into here is this. So let's look at that, where there's already a lot of energy, and how can we shape it in a way that really, really demonstrates our commitment to DEIJB? What are some easy, low-hanging fruit ideas that we can do, and competencies that we could have. And if you're new in this conversation with your community, or new in your community, really start, just drip a little bit at a time, and just slowly introduce the topic as one of importance. Relate it to the spirituality. Don't do anything else. Just mention it. you know, and then the next time, maybe as more in a talk, or maybe somebody else comes in and talks about it. You know, lots of different ways to do it, but to really go slow, because we have to build safety or people will just be turned off. And if they get turned off and go right to shame and their own shame, and it just feels like too much, and why do we have to do it? Because if we love everyone, then how can I be a racist? How could we be a racist? You know, but if we're not unpacking, you know, the work of anti-racism, then it dissolves into the well-meaning attitudes. So, and that is a privilege.
Experienced that in my ministry. So yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I had one other thing to say is don't eliminate the idea that you may have people in your congregation who are trained and do training in this kind of work.
Very
And
good.
and to
Yes.
consider and even ask, because I've had people that have excellent background in this, and I was like, oh my gosh, we'll start doing some courses and classes and offerings, and it's created some great conversations that we didn't previously have. So
I love it. That is so good. I'm gonna put last thing here. I'm gonna put the link into to the DEIJB calls on the region, and this is where all the past recordings are, and PowerPoints as well. That did not take
Thank
right
you.
to my page. Let me try that again. There we go. There, that's the link. All right, that'll get you there. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and we'll see you